Nip over to esports pools and you can play fantasy esports and bet on games. But if you're going to, be sure you're in the right frame of mind. Always gamble responsibly. Pick the best team. Get it right. Always question why an overrated player's numbers exist. Find the value picks. Don't miss the forest for the trees. Resolve yourself to be shrewd. Draken sounds like Drake, which is an old medieval term for dragon. And if you slay this dragon, you could win your share of gold. Now, it's your choice whether you want to do it or not. I wouldn't threaten you. NiP are the champions of a big event recently, IEM Season 12 Oakland, beating the two best teams in the world, in fact, in SK and FaZe, one of whom is yet to be established, is actually likely in the next month, 2 months, to probably establish this as their era. That's how good these teams are and how clear it is that they're the teams that are going to win the events. So in a world in which they've won a massive event, they beat both those teams, one of them probably going to become a truly historic team, already both on the verge, you think to yourself, well, that kind of shows that NiP's got this potential, right? They could do something special. But actually, if you examine it in the context of the other tournaments NiP's played, that very victory at IEM Oakland and the nature of how it came about shows why NiP is not an elite team and aren't set to become an elite team anytime soon, if ever, with this lineup. NiP are fool's gold. Now, if you understand what fool's gold is, look it up online on Wikipedia. It's basically something which at first glance, so we can imagine in olden days when people are digging around, if you saw that glitter, that little gleam, it looks like gold. So you think, oh, fuck, it's gold. But if you go for it, it's essentially worthless in the context and contrasted against what real gold is and what real gold is worth. NiP, with this lineup, since the player break, has played 5 LANs. Of those 5 LANs, they have reached the playoffs only twice, and one of those times was the first tournament after the player break, DreamHack Malmo. So in the 4 tournaments since Malmo, they've reached the playoffs once. Otherwise, they're getting eliminated before reaching any kind of playoff setting. Admittedly, Blast was a tournament in which only the top 2 teams made playoffs. And obviously, it's worth pointing out, the reason why the first tournament, Malmo being a playoff berth, isn't that great is because so many teams were coming back from the break with new lineups and new approach, getting back into form, etc. You want to be having your better results now to show that you're a top team. So here's the thing. Let's look at these tournaments, tournament by tournament, and different components of NiP's journey. So first of all, let's combine the 2 events before their IEM victory and after the player break. So we've got DreamHack Malmo and the E-League Premier. So over these tournaments, they won 8 maps and they lost 7 maps. So 53% win rate. Yeah, that's decent. That's not bad, especially when you're playing against good teams. Problem is, wins and losses are all over the place. But even so, yeah, if you just look at the wins, that's pretty good, right? So in the wins and losses, okay, they can beat teams like they beat the new FaZe. They beat Gambit, who was looking pretty decent at that point for the first couple of tournaments. But you know what? At the same time period, they could also lose to Envious a couple of times, who's not that good on LAN. They lost to the bad Na'Vi with Seized in a game. Then you go, it's okay, all right performance before IEM. Let's go to IEM, their big tournament performance. They won 9 maps and they lost 4 maps. So 69.23% win rate. Very good. Their best event. You look at their wins, they won maps, or at least 1 map, against every opponent they played. Their only losses were to SK and FaZe, the 2 best teams in the world. But here's the issue. It might seem counterintuitive, but the losses and wins they had against the 2 best teams in the world that they had won the tournament against actually show NiP's problems, because this was NiP's best form. This was NiP peaking, having everything go right for them. Their best form, their best tournament by far, and against the top 2 teams in the world, they went 5-4 in maps. So they didn't dominate in terms of maps won. They narrowly won the series against the 2 teams combined. In their 4 losses against SK and FaZe, NiP got less than 10 rounds themselves in 3 of the 4 maps that they lost to those elite teams. In the 5 wins against those elite teams, the opponent got 10 or more rounds in 4 out of the 5. So there was only 1 game where the opponent didn't get 10 rounds when NiP won a map against them out of SK and FaZe, and they still got 9, and that was SK. So the margins for victory were way too slim. The margins for defeat are too large. Like if they win, it's not by a massive amount. If they lose, they can lose by a massive amount against these elite teams. And again, this was NiP at their best. This was in their best form. And this is what they accomplished. They very narrowly did it. So now let's go and look after IEM. So we've got these two tournaments, Blast Pro Series and EPL Season 6. So they won 3 games, they tied a game, and they lost 6 games. So they have a win rate of 30%. Now that is terrible. Now, admittedly, at Blast, yeah, you're playing with the best teams in the world. But at EPL, you're not always playing the best teams in the world. So you look at the wins that they have over these 2 tournaments. The only 2 teams they beat are North and Optic. Now, North is in a slump at the moment, and Optic is, yeah, I guess gradually they're rising, but they're far from an elite team. Now you look at their losses. Okay, they lost to SK. That's acceptable. SK is the best team in the world right now. They lost to Astralis with Dennis as a stand-in. I mean, losing to a stand-in, that's not particularly good, but okay, it's one map. They lost to G2, who's pretty shaky themselves, and actually had a terrible tournament at Blast. They lost to Misfits, okay, rising team, kind of like Optic, but still not legit as a top team or an elite team. And they lost to NRG, who was just flat out bad. So now, you've seen there, post-IEM, actually the worst period they've ever had. Worse than even pre-IEM. So it's gotten worse for them since their best result. So let's combine all these results, shall we? These 3 different phases, as it were, and look at the total for these 5 lands. So the total actually doesn't look that good even with IEM added in, because you've got 20 wins, 1 tie, and 17 losses. Now, think about that for a second. So when they won IEM, they won 9 maps. Over these 5 lands, including IEM, they've won 20 maps. So that's 52.63% win rate. That's fairly average. That's fairly humdrum. That's nowhere close to an elite win rate of maps. And even worse, IEM, a single event, accounts for almost half of the total wins that they've had over 5 events. So if one of your events is 9 wins, and then you only had 11 wins over the other 4 events, you can see that was an outlier, right? That wasn't something you could expect to see again. Then you consider that outside of IEM, they've only won 1 playoff series, which was versus the bad Na'Vi, post-player break when they had seized and Zeus had just come back. And they almost got 2-0'd by Na'Vi there, because Na'Vi won the first map. Second map, I think, was the Nuke game, right? And that was the one where Na'Vi was in position to win. I think they even had series point. And then NiP came back and won in overtime. So they almost got 2-0 by Na'Vi and would have won no playoff series outside of their IEM run. So IEM ultimately was a massive outlier. Now, let's look at the factors for how they won IEM with all the different players, etc. And you'll also see why that is an outlier. Because first and foremost, who was the MVP of IEM? It was Rez, right? The newest recruit. Great performance, some fantastic entrying. Sports Psychologist did some great work on him, right? Well, looking at these 5 tournaments, including the 2 after that, it's clearly an overperformance. Like, of the 5 lands, Rez has had 2 that were really good. IEM was by far his best. Blast was pretty crap. And EPL was solid to good when you consider he often plays entry roles. But overall, for the 5 lands, fragging production not really good enough, and we've had a letdown since IEM. Then you go and look, right, well, who was the carry of the team in terms of like consistent frags? It was Forest. So Forest was carrying at IEM. He was a big reason why they got in position to win the tournament. Okay, he was pretty reliable pre-Blast. He was looking in really good form. He has been really poor since IEM. So he had a 0.59 FPR at Blast and a 0.61 FPR at EPL. Those are nowhere near the fragging production numbers of a top 20 player. Those are very poor. Those are the sorts of numbers that someone like Mo has from Gambit when he has a bad tournament. And this is Forest. Those were over 5 maps each. 0.59 FPR, 5 maps, 0.61 FPR, 5 maps. Now, that's even worse, because when you're only playing 5 maps, if you're a top player, you actually want to be having really good numbers there. Like someone like Simple would have like a 0.75, 0.8 over the 5 maps if his team got eliminated early, and say, right, well, he's still carrying even if his team lost. Forrest's not even playing that many maps, and he's getting shit results. Also, you can add them up to 10 maps and see that over 10 maps, a big distribution, he's getting very poor fragging output. So Forrest hasn't been a reliable factor like he was pre-IEM and at IEM. Okay, get right. Having solid fragging was a big deal. Funnily enough, Get Right's one of the only factors that actually has continued on and hasn't really had a dip. He's been very reliable, but that alone isn't going to get it done because it took so many factors for them to win IEM Oakland. Okay, you might remember on the last map, the deciding winning map on cash at IEM Oakland, Exist had some massive clutches and ballsy plays, like classic NiP magic. Exist comes up with big plays, has some crazy M for a second or two, and you think, fuck, where's that come from? Here's the problem. He wasn't that big of a factor at practically all the rest of IEM Oakland. It was only really that last map. His fragging for the whole tournament was pretty poor. And actually, he's one of the few reliable elements in as much as his fragging remains pretty poor, especially for someone who was an in-game leader, supposed to be a fragging in-game leader. He's not someone, I mean, admittedly, perhaps he does some supportive elements, but he's certainly not someone who's doing a lot of tactics and to go super in-depth. So what's the other final factor that was a big issue in them winning Oakland? It was threats timeouts, right? They're not going to work all the time. First of all, you have limited opportunities. You have like 4 timeouts a map at certain tournaments. Hence, in-game leaders are so valuable right now in Counter-Strike. So it worked, yes, fantastically for that one tournament, still only won by narrow margins. Other than that, it's not going to be the panacea to cure all that ails you in NiP, having threat do these timeouts. Now, one factor that wasn't a reason why they won Oakland was Draken, because Draken actually had a pretty poor tournament overall. Funnily enough, Oakland was his worst statistical event of this 5-tournament period. He's actually been much, much better since Oakland. He's had the best numbers in the team. He's been at like 0.8 FPR, high fragging production. So Draken's at his peak right now, and NiP's getting banged out and is coming in like second to last place. They're not going to playoffs. You can see the problem here. It's not like it's just all the negatives are stacked up, and if just one of them comes back around again. No, what's happened is other players have gone downhill, or in the case of Rez, generally just gone back to where they were. Draken's gone way up, but it hasn't had a positive impact on the results. Then you go and look at their map pool and say, right, well, are they specialists anywhere? Have they got a little edge they can carve out? No. The problem with their map pool is they actually only have 2 maps where they have a winning record. No, 3 maps they have a winning record on, which is Train, Nuke, and Cobble. And Nuke is one of their second to least played map. Train's one of is their second to most played map. You go look at the other maps that they're good on. Okay, so Train's one, that's a pretty good map for them. They're pretty legit there. Overpass, like they've been playing it a lot. They've got a lot of key wins on it. They've actually only won 4 out of the 10 games they've played on it. So actually, overall, not that great an Overpass team. Again, Nuke, people don't really play it, so you're going to get that banned against you a lot. Cobblestone, yeah, they've been all right. They're 3-2 on that. Cash, they're 2-3, and that includes the big win over FaZe. And most of their success on that map that made everyone remember them from ESL, 1 Cologne, etc., that was pre-player break. They're not that great on Cash now. Inferno, a map that, they got that key win against SK, they're only 2-2 on that map. Mirage used to be their permaban. They've at least played it a little bit. They've varied up their bans depending on tournament, which is actually a big part of how they were able to make that key run at IEM Oakland, because as far as I remember, they banned Inferno in the group stage and just played it against SK as a joker pick. So they've been willing to play some Mirage. Overall, they're pretty shaky in the map pool. Like, they have a wide map pool. They can play a lot of maps, but they're not particularly deep in many areas at all. Like, it basically goes Train, Nuke as a pocket pick, and that's about it. Like, they're not really elite at any other maps, or even comparable to elite. So the problem is they don't really have a sick home map. Like, they have Train. There's not that many teams you can pick that against and win. There's FaZe, sure. How many other teams out there is it that you can pick Train and win against? Because you think of all the other top teams. G2 bans it, Astralis loves it, Cloud9 loves it, SK definitely wants to play it, North, I mean, they're actually not that bad at it. It's not that great a map to have as your home map right now. They can play a lot of maps, but they have pretty wonky success. Now, when you look at the map pool, you can see where they're able to have a chance and beat FaZe narrowly. Because they've got Train, they've got Nuke, and they've got Cobble. Now, those are all key maps to have against FaZe. Because if you have Cobble, they have to ban Cobble. Except if they didn't, then they let Cobble come through and they get wrecked on it. And then you've got your Train and Nuke to hopefully play against them. And those are 2 key maps to get wins on. They got one on Train, and obviously they didn't play Nuke because that actually ended up being what FaZe banned instead. That's less the case for other teams. Even when they did the Inferno pick against SK, well, not pick, but let it come through as the 3rd map, that was a gamble. They're not that good on that map themselves. They'd been banning that map themselves. They just did it because it was SK, and SK's had issues on Inferno. So there's not even really from the lineup or the map pool, a blueprint for them to get wins against top teams that are better than them, more higher ranked at the moment, and therefore be an elite level team. There's also the problem that this is not a new lineup. They've had this lineup from before the player break. So this lineup has now been around for almost 6 months. So a massive improvement is highly improbable at that point in time. It just doesn't tend to happen. The closest you could come, and it wouldn't even have been quite that long, is like Team Liquid when they made this role swaps and they got a lot better and had those top twos at Mykonos and then at ESL New York. Now, what people might not understand about that is they did literally like 4 role swaps or something. They changed up Stanislaw, no longer in-game leader, became the lurker. Nitro became an entry fragging in-game leader. Elige became involved in the tactics and less of a greedy player. Twists went from being a lurker on the outskirts of the map to being in the entry pack. They didn't change players, but they almost effectively changed players by almost changing up essentially everyone in the team except JDM and how they played. So that's like an outlier for teams that after many months together can make a massive improvement. And even then, that leveled off eventually. That only worked in the short term, didn't survive the honeymoon phase. So improvement's very unlikely. Now, I will give them an outside caveat that having Rez and Draken, who are still not quite that experienced, definitely not the top level, still have to get more tournaments under their belt, right? That is a positive because, yes, those players, one or both, could still develop further. Like, Draken's playing very well right now. Maybe he can acquire some level of consistency as he learns his role. Rez doesn't have to do it all the time, but has the occasional big event. That could be a big factor. The problem is you can also factor in that's not guaranteed they develop. They might get worse. Rez might get even more figured out. His issues that he temporarily fixed with the sports psychologist might return. Draken might have really great fragging, but not have any impact on actually winning the games as he has at the moment. The old school players, Get Right and Forrest. Get Right's playing really well right now, but it was Forrest who was playing really well before IEM. So where's the consistency for them? Are they going to be elite level players? It doesn't seem that reasonable, right? It's kind of got to be a team effort. So the problem is, I don't think it's reasonable to expect NiP to go much further than they have right now. They actually look set to just remain a bottom half of the top 10 team and nothing more. I mean, perhaps they could have NiP magic like IEM. Even then, it takes everything. It's pretty unlikely, and they might be able to win an event. But as you see, when you even dive into their wins at that event and before and after, it's not very likely, is it? So NiP, it was cool that they won IEM. It was a great NiP magic moment, but NiP are fool's gold.